This lecture will cover the rise of Zeus, more specifically the creation of the world and how the Olympians came to rule it. Now for Hesiod, in his creation myth, cosmogony is the same as theogony. In other words, cosmogony, or the origin of the world, was seen to be synonymous with theogony, which is the origin of the gods. So the gods are born when the world is born. There are two major creation myths that we will cover from the two main mythographers, Hesiod and Homer. So here in Hesiod's creation myth, we're going to find that in the beginning there was chaos. Out of this chaos emerged Gaia, Mother Earth, who is going to give birth asexually to Uranus, the sky. She then mates with him, creating the next generation of Titans. These Titans, led by Kronos and Rhea, are going to also then produce the Olympians, the generation and the household names that we all know, specifically Zeus, Demeter, Hera, and Hades. They then overthrow their parents, allowing man to be created in the god's image, and also after that animals, as we will discuss. Now, out of the chaos does not only come Gaia, we also find a number of other primordial features that shape our universe are also born. Erebus, or darkness; Nyx, or night; Eros, sexual love, later to be known as Cupid to the Romans; Gaia, the earth as we discussed; and Tartarus, which is going to be at the base of the universe and the Christian equivalent to hell. Now, unlike Hesiod, Homer has a slight variation on the creation myth because for him, like so many other cultures in the Near East and Egypt, and even for Christians and Jews and Muslims, in the beginning was blackness, represented in this case by Nyx, a massive black bird who lays an egg in the darkness. Out of this egg is going to come Eros. The two halves of the egg form the earth below and the sky above, or Gaia and Uranus, her son. In this version, Eros makes them fall in love, and their coupling produces the Titans, as well as from them come the giants. Now the Titans are led by Kronos and Rhea, who in their mating produce the Olympians, in his case Zeus, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, who overthrow their parents and again make way for the possibility for man to be created in God's image. Now, gods plus mortal women, when they mate, you will find demigods are produced, such as Perseus and Hercules, Theseus, and others. Now, with this early version of the creation myth, the first step is to create the universe. How does it come to be? We must delineate the space as the Greeks understood it and as was bequeathed to the Middle Ages with Christians, with Olympus, or heaven if you would, the home of the gods, being at the topmost part of the world in the vault of the heavens. Gaia, Mother Earth, is going to be in the middle where we live on, and then Tartarus is down below Hades at the bottommost section of the universe. Thus, as they understood it, the universe was a sphere. So they did not understand, as we often misconceive, of the earth being flat, that the universe is round. The part that we walk on is going to find the pillars of heaven up on each side. This corresponds with the conception of the universe that was shared by the earliest peoples in the Middle East. Now, in the Near East, we understand that the earth and sky are also gendered. The Egyptians have it backwards, though, to where the female form is going to be in the sky, such as the goddess Hathor, whose celestial milk gives us the Milky Way, and often mates with a male fertile god who represents the earth. But either way, all peoples understood the world before the Abrahamic faiths of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to be gendered, that being, it is through sexual procreation that the world is created. So Gaia does asexually produce two sons, Uranus and Pontus, one responsible for the sky, the other for water and rivers. So she mates with each of them, producing different gods and other monstrosities and monsters. So when she mates with Uranus, her son, they produce the Titans, led by Kronos and Rhea, and then also the Cyclops, the round eyes, the single-eyed creatures we know from the great tales such as the Odyssey jealousy. And then the Hecankires are going to be the 100-handers we will discuss, wonderful monsters that come out of this union early on before the Olympians civilize the universe. Finally, we'll discuss how Aphrodite is produced from Uranus. So Uranus is a sky god, and she is the son and lover of Gaia. Now they are early on perpetually locked in sexual union, and while they are continually mating, they're producing children, forever locked in the womb of Gaia, or in the folds of the earth as we understand it. So the ones that are created very famously would be the three Cyclops, Brontes, Sterapes, and Arges, otherwise known literally, if we translate this from Greek, Thunderer, Flasher, and Brightener, much like the reindeer. Then we have the understanding they become the smiths of the gods. They will fashion the lightning bolts for Zeus, very important for a battle to come. And they are banished to Tartarus by Uranus, their father, for he fears them, so he locks them away. The Cyclops are often shown accompanying and helping Hephaestus, or Vulcan in the Roman tradition, the god of the forge, create weapons and armor, often for heroes like Achilles and other great warriors we will see in art moving forward. The other monstrosity to be produced when Gaia mates with Uranus are the three Hecatonchires, the 100-handers, who have 50 heads and 100 arms each. They also were feared by their father Cronus and banished to Tartarus because he feared they would overthrow him, so they are locked away in hell, as it were. Now, the Hecatonchires are actually going to get their name from the Greek word for hecta or hecto, meaning 100. In our terminology, we would say a hectogram, for instance. Now they also produce the 12 Titans, so Kronos, Rhea, Oceanus, Hyperion, and others. Though these Titans are rarely represented in art, they stood for primordial forces of nature, such as death, such as the seasons and time and or space. Hyperion, for instance, is the sun god. He is not the sun, to be mistaken for other gods, but the original celestial god. He is the father of Helios, or Helios in the Roman tradition. That is the god who rides the chariot across the sky, pulling the sun with him. He also is going to be the father of Selene, the moon goddess. Eos, the goddess of dawn, who brings up the sun at dawn. And then we find that these are also obscure and rarely represented in art as well. Other children of Helios, for instance, the son of Hyperion, are more famous. For Phaethon is going to be the son of Helios and Clymene, the wife of an Ethiopian king. Thus, of course, he can claim to be a demigod. So when he realized his parentage, he goes to Helios, the sun god, and asks to have him prove his paternity by letting him drive the chariot across the sky. So the god gave him one wish, and that's what he wished for, and regretted it immediately. This will be a moral lesson that is repeated throughout Greek mythology. Nothing too much, nothing in excess, that we should not try to overstretch ourselves and try to take on the god's role. For we find that asking to drive the chariot across the sky, he quickly loses control, scorching and searing the skin of Ethiopians in Africa, burning them black. Thus we find this is the etiological explanation why we have darkly complected peoples in Africa and not in Europe. So we find that he would continue to scorch the earth, killing off everyone. Would Zeus not have saved the world by blasting him from the chariot, killing him as he falls into the river Po in North Italy? This is very often shown in art, and for Christians, it of course represents the hubris of man and or the downfall of rebel angels, for the images look very similar for when the Archangel Michael casts out these demons from heaven. It is a divine presence casting someone down. Now another daughter of Hyperion is going to be Selene. She is the moon goddess. So she would often have the crescent moon on her head, similar to Diana or Artemis we'll talk about here shortly. She falls in love with the shepherd Endymion. Now, this is going to be a common story of tragic love that we find throughout mythology. However, Selene was smart in her request. While Endymion slept, she seduced him while he slept in a cave and bore him 50 daughters. Now, she had Zeus place him in an eternal sleep so that he would never grow old, but then also wished that he would sleep forever and would remain beautiful. Her sister, however, who is known as being incredibly promiscuous and having many affairs, is not as insightful and did not have the foresight to ask this. So we find that the goddess of dawn, as is represented in art as a very inviting, youthful female figure representing fecundity and new life, thus, of course, has more sexual overtones than other goddesses, for new life is represented by dawn, dusk represents death. She is going to fall in love with Tithonus, the Trojan prince, and thus asks Zeus to make him immortal like her sister had her lover Endymion. The problem was she forgot to ask for eternal youth. Thus Tithonus aged until the goddess abandons him as a husk, as an old withered man. In a later version, he turns into a cicada. Thus, of course, the insects that are going to shed, once again, their skin. So we find that laying around, as the Greeks would see that as a husk left over by Tithonus. Now, none of the Titans who were born that we've discussed, who were still locked away in Gaia's womb, could come out into the light of Hyperion because Uranus despised his children, keeping them hidden away in the womb of the earth, as we discussed. This foretells the actions of his son Kronos, as we'll see here in a moment. So Gaia, who is always in pain, these labor pains of wanting to give birth to all of these children, is going to trick her son, who is constantly mating with her. So she fashions a terrible sickle out of the ore of the earth and gives it to Kronos, her son, who waits inside her womb for her father to come panting with lust to embrace his mother. Thus you must imagine him in the womb holding this sickle, this knife, that he uses to grab with his left hand the genitals of Uranus, castrating him, thus separating the two. Uranus then floats up and rises to the sky where he belongs, setting the official universal order in place. So here we have the dome of the heavens finally in place with Uranus and his other children. We have, of course, Hyperion and Selene and Eos, Helios, all of the gods associated with the heavens, the stars, the moon, the sun. And then we have Gaia, Mother Earth, down below, thus allowing there to be a separation between them and a new order to arise. Now, from the blood of any god or monster will create, in turn, monsters. So we find this is no exception for Uranus. For when his genitals were severed, blood fell to the earth, as we find it's gushing out of his groin. We find that the blood is then going to become a series of monsters. The Erinyes, the Furies, as you know them, are these female spirits who come up, who drive men mad, who are guilty of kindred bloodshed. There are 3 of them, and shown as rather withered hags with snakes wrapped around them and these bat-like wings. So we find that they will plague these people who hurt their family. When Hercules, for instance, even though it was not his fault, is forced to go mad and kill his own family, they drive him insane for the rest of his life. So the moral of the story here is kindred bloodshed is worse than other violence, and so the Greeks abhor that. You protect your family, and those that harm one's family are the most hated and ostracized in Greek society. Now, Uranus's blood also becomes the giants, literally the earthborn ones, because they come from the earth. Once his blood hit the earth, up springs these massive giants who are incredibly strong and violent. And they are often shown in Greek art as having a male torso, often with shaggy beards and hair, and the lower half you find they turn into serpents. So each leg is going to be a massive serpent with a head at the end. Now, the last bit to be created in this instance by Uranus's blood and or the severing of his genitals is Aphrodite, who, remember, gives us the word aphrodisiac to understand how to seduce someone, as well as in the Roman Venus, giving us the term venereal for venereal diseases. So we find that because she is going to be the goddess of love and sex, she is born from genitals, so it makes perfect sense to them. So we find that the genitals are tossed into the sea by Cronus, out of which arises a white discharge, the foam of the ocean, and from that comes Aphrodite. Most famously, we see this in art from antiquity all the way through the Renaissance as her coming out of the ocean nude on a shell, being blown very often by the west wind Zephyrus, as in this instance, to her sacred island of Cyprus. So here you can see, even in antiquity, she rises out of the ocean and is clothed by nymphs that will take care of her. Specifically, the nymph Pomona greets her on Cyprus, where her temples still are today. Now, along with Uranus, Gaia also mates with her other asexually born son, Pontus, who is known for rivers and water. Not the ocean, because Neptune will be the god of salt water, but of rivers and streams. So when they mate, they produce, because he's responsible for water, these half-animal monsters that are taken and inspired by Egyptian art, which had existed for millennia before. Things like harpies, gorgons, and sphinxes. Their union produces some of the most famous characters from Greek mythology that are household names now. They produce, starting off, Keto, which is the massive dragon sea serpent that Perseus must fight off to win Andromeda. The children of their children will, of course, also be famous and will eventually produce heroes like Achilles, the horrific Gorgon Medusa, as well as Pegasus, all the way down to Cerberus, the Hydra, the Chimera, and the Sphinx. Now, this reverses the morphology and meaning of ancient Egyptian creatures. For, as you remember, the Egyptian gods are shown as having human bodies and animal heads. The specific animal head that they have tells us which god they are. So if it has a falcon head, then we know this is going to be the Egyptian god Horus and son of Osiris. Now, in reversing it, they give them human heads and animal bodies and negative meaning. So harpies, literally meaning snatchers, are shown with human heads. They are females that snatch away children and are going to be spirits of the storm, carrying people to their death. We also find here that the Sphinx, a benevolent creature representing the pharaohs and the gods for the Egyptians, becomes understood as the strangler. This is a Greek term, Sphinx. So she is changed to a woman. Thus, we must remember that the Greeks are very sexist and misogynistic, and so the female aspect is negative. So they add wings to the Sphinx and state that it brings a plague, and it would be the riddle of the Sphinx that's going to terrorize a city until Oedipus is going to answer the riddle. We also find the Gorgons come about from this union, that being they are going to have women's bodies, but with wings, snakes for hair, much like Medusa, their sister, and boar's tusks. The Geryon is also produced, another warrior with 3 bodies joined at the waist, with his dog Orthus that has 2 heads to help him in battle. Now, these are not to be confused with the Makai, or the spirits of battle often shown in pop culture today, which are 2 bloodthirsty spirits that run rampaging like Ares himself through the battlefield. Cerberus is also going to be a famous offspring of this union. He is a 50 or more, popularly 3-headed hound that guards the gates of hell, keeping, once again, the dead in. He can be seduced by music or food by some heroes we will discuss, and virtually every great hero in Greek mythology must confront death and go to the underworld, confronting this horrible creature. Finally, we have the Hydra, literally meaning watery in Greek, which is a serpent with 7 heads that would eventually be killed by Hercules in his labors. The chimera is also a fearsome beast that comes out of this, a wonderful combination. Remember that a chimera lowercase merely means a combination of creatures, but chimera uppercase is going to be a specific one from Greek mythology, with the head of a lion, the tail of a snake, and a goat head protruding from one of its sides. This was a horrific creature because it could breathe fire and was feared in ancient Greece. We find that it comes up quite often in popular culture, trying to imaginatively bring these creatures together. It is slain eventually by the Greek hero Bellerophon, who uses a lead-tipped spear to thrust it into the beast's throat, thus melting it and suffocating the beast. He is only able to do so, of course, because he's riding Pegasus, who comes out of Medusa's neck when she is decapitated by Perseus. With the separation of Gaia and Uranus and an explanation of their offspring, we now turn to the dawn of the Olympians, for it is at this time that the Titans take over. The children of Gaia and Uranus emerge from the earth, take over dominion of their mother. So Kronos is the first king after Uranus is overthrown and pushed to the sky. But he is told by his parents, rather ironically, Uranus and Gaia, that his children would overthrow him. And this is a sentiment that will be repeated in nearly every class we will have, and nearly every myth that we will cover, that men are fearful of the next generation, of losing power to them. Therefore, given this fear, Kronos is going to have his wife and sister Rhea give him the children that they have as soon as they're born, and he devours them. From Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and finally the youngest, Zeus. Each time, of course, Rhea is horrified as her children are eaten. This is as horrifying at the time as it is now, and it's reflected in art and shown as Saturn devouring his children. One of the most horrific things that one could imagine, harming one's own offspring. Now, Cronus, because of this understanding that he ate his children, is known as Saturn in the Roman tradition, and is later represented with a sickle or scythe, an hourglass, and as an old man who eats children. Thus, he represents death in the common imagination, when we think of death as a shadowy robed figure with a scythe coming once again with an hourglass to retrieve people from the land of the living, to drag them down into the land of the dead. We think of Cronus. That's because in the Renaissance, they conflated the term Cronus with Cronus, which is going to be the Greek term for the god who is born of Uranus and Gaia, and time in Latin. So we find that in the Renaissance, poetically, this god represents time that runs out for all of us and is what really kills us. Now, Gaia and Uranus, having foretold the overthrow of their son, tells Rhea to go to Crete to give birth to their youngest child, Zeus. He is raised there by nymphs. Rhea instead gives her husband a stone to swallow instead of the baby Zeus, allowing him to live and grow. So fully grown, having been protected through his youth, Zeus returns and forces Kronos to vomit up his siblings, lastly vomiting up the stone that Rhea fed him. Thus we begin the Titanomachy. Zeus has his siblings back, he assembles them and goes to war with their parents, who unfairly imprisoned them and ate them. So we find that this is the battle between the Olympians and the Titans, where the name Titanomachy is derived. Now only the Titans Prometheus and Themis are going to side with Zeus, which is very important because they play a major role in the creation of man and the duping of man with woman, according to the Greeks. So this battle lasts for a decade, the same length of time as the Trojan War. In fact, 10 years for war seems to be a common number and chronological unit that keeps coming up for the ancient Greeks. So finally, this battle rages on and on and on until Zeus learns from Gaia that he could not win until he freed those that were banished to Tartarus by Uranus. And so this battle is very often or very rarely shown in pop culture, but when it is, it tries to stress the ferocity of this older generation of gods, such as in the movie Immortals. So releasing the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires, we find that the 100-handers and these Cyclops assist the Olympians in battling the Titans. So they of course fashion the lightning bolt for Zeus as his primary weapon. The 100-handers are throwing boulders and cliffs as missiles towards the opposing side. The Titans are of course defeated and cast into Tartarus, which is described in antiquity in much the same way that Christians would later describe it, because this is the variation, this is the original version of hell that later gets recorded. In fact, in the book of Mark we find that hell is actually called Hades. So it is a fiery place where people are tormented for blaspheming or going against the gods. It is often shown in pop culture in a variety of ways, but must always be subterranean and involve some type of seclusion, isolation, imprisonment, and fire. Not all of the Titans were of course condemned to Tartarus. Very famously, Atlas, the son of Uranus, is condemned to hold up the heavens at the edge of the earth with the pillars of the earth, and continues to separate the earth and the sky, adding insult to injury for the parents of the Titans. So we find this is the misconception in modern usage. Atlas does not hold up the earth. Instead, he holds up the dome of the heavens, pressing the heavens separate from Gaia. It is at this time, with the Titans defeated, with the help of Gaia, and of course of the Cyclops and the 100-handers, that Gaia turns on Zeus. Now she resents his victory, and this is quite often that Mother Nature is seen to turn on the Greeks. They're fearful of Mother Nature. You cannot trust it. And so we find that she, in her resentment, mates with Tartarus itself. She mates with hell and births this horrific beast called Typhus or Typhon, where we get our word for typhoon. And now Typhus is going to have hissing vipers from the waist down, much like the giants, with wings and shaggy hair. We find that the Titanomachy now begins. So Typhus is going to quickly seize a wonderful weapon and is going to sever the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, not letting him move, placing him in a cave guarded by a dragon. We find that Hermes is able to sneak in and restore Zeus's sinews, allowing him to move his hands and feet. Zeus then chases Typhus across the earth in a chariot, hurling thunderbolts at him forged by the Cyclops, to Mount Etna, where he then buries him. And this is the etiological explanation for the volcanic activity on Mount Etna, for we still believe that Typhus is there breathing, and that's what this is causing, the heat of the volcano, the ash and the smoke to come out. It is at this time, finally, that Zeus is the supreme king. But in this succession myth, just like with his parents, it demands, given that it was foretold that he would be overthrown by his children, so what he does is marry Metis, the notion of cleverness herself. So this is his first wife and the first queen of Mount Olympus. Now Gaia and Uranus are going to try to upstage Zeus, who thought that he thought and was too clever to get tricked, and claimed that Metis's next child would in fact overthrow Zeus, just as the previous generations had. Therefore Zeus, knowing and foreseeing this event, swallows his pregnant wife whole, mother and child. And this is of course why Zeus is of course so clever and of course so witty and smart, is he is going to do his best thinking where his pregnant wife is in his stomach. So Zeus is then going to complain of a headache thereafter. So Hephaestus comes in, the god of the forge, and strikes him in the head with an axe, performing a type of ancient surgery or cranial surgery, out of which springs Athena, who is fully clothed in battle armor with a shield and a helmet. So we find that she is often shown in a miniature version diminutively coming out of the head of Zeus. Thus, because she comes out of the head of Zeus, she is the goddess of wisdom. Just as Aphrodite came out of genitals, she is the goddess of sex. So Athena in the Greek tradition becomes Minerva in the Roman, one of the most important goddesses and gods of all time for these two cultures. For she is the virgin goddess of wisdom. She is going to take on male attributes. She never marries. She is the goddess of defense and strategic warfare. Therefore, she is the preferable god of war that one prays to, not Ares, who represents mere bloodshed and blood rage. So even though that she is female in sex, everything else that she does is masculine. She will always side with male gods in disagreements with women. She even, of course, curses Medusa after she is raped by Poseidon in her own temple. So now that we have Athena and we have Hercules, we'll talk about that later, we are ready for the final battle because Typhon failed Gaia. So she in turn ensures there is a last battle to come before the Olympians can rule. This battle is known as the Gigantomachy, or the Olympians battling the giants, those half-men, half-snake monsters who were conceived from the blood of Uranus's genitals that dropped to the ground. They are urged on by their mother Gaia to attack the Olympians. They are shown again as bearded with snake legs and long disheveled hair, just like Typhon, another monster that came from the earth. This is often shown very famously in Greek art, with the Olympians battling these giants in the last major battle for the universe. So we find this is true from the Archaic period all the way up to the Hellenistic age. The Greeks are very interested in and obsessed with how the great battle that the Olympians took place in reflects their own great battles at the time against the Persians or against the Gauls. Now, they're often paired in combat, and you'll often see later on Hercules present because they need Hercules to help in order to finish off these giants, to help the Olympians, completely destroy them. In art, we find that in Christian times and later in the Renaissance, this is seen as imitating the fall of the rebel angels. So God and his angels above are often shown as Zeus or Jupiter with the other Olympians casting down these nude men below to the earth or beneath it. Here we have Giulio Romano's version, as we see the Mount Olympus is going to be assaulted by these giants as these giant rocks crumble around them and crush them. Thus at this time, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon cast lots to divide up the world. By right, you find that Hades should have ruled everything because he was the eldest son. But they decided, and Zeus tricked them in and convinced them to divide it by lots. That's by random. So we find that Zeus becomes commander of the universe and king of the skies with his thunderbolts. Poseidon rules over the oceans. And then finally, Hades rules the underworld, getting the short straw. So next class we'll continue on with what the Olympians do next in the creation of humans, specifically man first and then woman.